Hey guys, welcome back. So we are jumping into Ultimate Universe with the one shot that is setting everything off. And even though this is done in a way where you could just jump in here and then just catch the other issues rolling out in the months to come, I highly recommend that you read Ultimate Invasion first. Because even though this story does a great job standing on its own, Ultimate Invasion is going to add a lot more to it, just trust me. And I got that link below for anyone who needs to get caught up. So with that said, if you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe to catch the spills every week. And don't forget to hit that bell up top to get all notifications so we can squat up in the comments for the first hour. Alright, so coming back, we pick up just 2 weeks after the conclusion of Ultimate Invasion, where we saw Howard Stark seal the city, trapping himself and the Maker inside, which now has left the rest of the world in a state where you have this quiet war taking place, with members of the Illuminati trying to take over and control this world themselves since the Maker's gone, while on the other hand you have Reed and Tony Stark who are trying to free this world and make things right. So now coming back 2 weeks later, we find both Reed and Tony in Asgard, where upon their arrival, they manage to pick up some floor schematics so that they can make their way to finding a specific prisoner. And at first, Reed isn't even sure if this is the right cell, even with the schematics saying that it is, because he admits if it were him, he would have lied just to hide the prisoner. But Tony tells him that they might as well give it a shot, because they don't have much time, and it's a gamble either way. So Reed takes a peep inside, and he's like, "Is anyone there?" Only to hear a voice respond saying, "Go away. I want no food nor drink, and I desire neither company nor conversation, for I have nothing to say, and nothing you should want to hear." And Reed's more or less like, "Oh yeah, this the guy." Because they've come here looking for Thor, and the way this guy's talking about his great shame and how he's been branded a traitor, it just confirms that the schematics they acquired were accurate. So Reed tells Thor that he's also a lawbreaker himself, a free man, righteous, and here to throw open the cage that imprisoned him wrongfully. Which then has Thor like, "Don't lie to me." So Reed tells him, "I promise it is true. I'm here to free one particular man, but only if that man is the god of thunder and lightning." And that's when the prisoner confirms, "I am he. I am Thor." So Tony, aka Iron Lad, he's pretty much like, "Okay, we got Thor, let's head to the ship." But Thor just walks off in the other direction, telling them not yet, because there's something he's got to pick up before they go. So of course, the two of them follow Thor, and we find that it's Mjolnir, which I think was the obvious guess for us on the outside looking in. And if not Mjolnir, then whatever the Earth 6160 equivalent would have been. But nonetheless, it's Mjolnir, and it's being heavily guarded by Lady Sif, who is his warden. And you can tell quickly from this conversation that when Loki took the throne, at some point Thor agreed to be taken prisoner as a byproduct of a prior arrangement, because Sif tells him this isn't in accordance with the agreement, and if Thor leaves, the blame's gonna be on her. But Thor just tells her again, "I'm leaving, and I'm leaving with what is mine," which right there just lets Sif know that this is coming down to a fight, which wouldn't be the first time between her and Thor. But right in the middle of this, one of her men get blasted by Iron Lad, who tells Thor that they gotta get moving, because the longer they take, the more time it gives for Asgard's reinforcements to show up. And so next, it's here where Thor calls for his hammer, where I'll admit, the first time that I read through this, it had me asking a couple of questions. And I will say I do appreciate them being answered throughout the course of how this goes down. Because with us seeing Thor here just take his hammer back and do the whole Asgardian glow up, it had me wondering like, well, why didn't he just do that earlier? Because I like that right here, Iron Lad, he asked the same question, which makes sense because him and Reed just met this guy and they're trying to figure out some things too. But Reed takes a guess and he tells Tony, "Given what we know, there's only one reason I can think of, and that reason is that Thor didn't want to." Which again just goes back to whatever agreement was made by Thor for him to become a prisoner, which I imagine Thor also looked at like it was a punishment that he deserved, since he quote unquote betrayed Loki's throne, which for some time had Thor believing that he was in the wrong, at least up until now, with Reed and Tony showing up and giving Thor this glimmer of a possibility that the pain he's held for years has actually been righteous anger. And at this point, with Thor just wrecking all of these guards, he's like, "Okay, I got my hammer, we can go." But now Tony's just like, "Man, nah, now we gotta fight our way all the way back to the ship." But Thor just gives Tony this look like, "Don't worry about that, I got something for that," as he tells the two of them to stand close so he can send them through the Bifrost and back to their ship without having to fight their way through Loki's army, just to make their way out of there. And as they leave, Sif disappears along with them. And just after this, we jump forward and we find that they've made their way back to Stark Tower, where at this time they're showing Thor, Captain America, who we saw them retrieve towards the end of Ultimate Invasion. And right here, they explain to Thor how Cap is much like them. He's a hero of an age that's been erased, though in his case, the time that Cap came from, it was much less corrupted. So right away, Thor's like, stand back, he should be freed as I was. But Tony and Reed are like, hold up, it's not that simple. Because getting Captain America out of the ice, it's a bit of a complicated process. And even though there's portions of the Maker's files that include excessive detail, there's still parts of this process that they're gambling with. Because on one hand, Reed mentions that they could speed this up by replacing the Captain's blood, but the files go on to say that his powers are derived from something called a super soldier serum, which they must conclude is a blood-based augmentation. So they've got to figure out the missing pieces before they attempt to get him out, or they could end up killing him in the process. So with hearing this, Thor asks if Captain America can hear them, and Tony tells him that he doesn't know. And perhaps later, when they're further along, when the Caps come closer to regaining consciousness. So Thor's just like, if he might hear us, then there's something I need to say, as he lifts his hammer and looks at Captain America and says, "Hear me, brother, I would free you now, as I would any in chains who deserve them not, with the risk not grave and the cost so high. But you have my word, should the time come when such a choice must be made, you will be freed. Better to die as such, than helpless and hopeless, trapped in a frozen hell." And right there, it's kind of like, man, yeah, this guy, he's Old Testament. But as soon as he says this, we find that Sif has just been sitting here the whole time, chilling, as she tells Thor that he's using some strong words, out here promising freedom when he doesn't have his own. And she tells him it's a bit disingenuous. But before they even get into it, again, Tony tells Sif that the whole purpose of what they're doing is to right what is wrong, because everything she thinks is real, it's actually a lie. And Tony even points at Sif and tells her that I think you should help us fix that, because Thor's not supposed to be your prisoner, he's supposed to be your king. Which at first just has Sif thinking that Tony's just making the same mistake that many others have made, with believing that since Thor's the son of Odin, that he should be king. And right here, even Thor's like, what do you mean I'm king? And Tony's like, man, you want the short version or the long version? And Thor more or less tells him that he wants the version where he can understand what Tony's talking about. So from here, Reed gives Thor and Sif the breakdown, telling them how the Maker, the ruler of this world, he's from a different universe, and he arrived here with a very specific mission, to systematically erase this world's heroes from existence. And now that he's trapped in his future city, they have the opportunity to change this world back into the world it was supposed to be. So from here, Reed goes on to explain how the Maker's been erasing heroes, which the Maker did by denying them of the circumstances and events that are supposed to transform them into who they were meant to be, which the Maker was able to do because he arrived in their universe, equipped with the knowledge of the history of this world's heroes. And again, this is something that Reed knows, not only from being the Maker's prisoner, but also from stealing the Maker's memory log, like we saw in Ultimate Invasion. So Reed now knows everything that the Maker knew about the history of this world. So Tony tells Thor clear as day this time, he was supposed to be the king of Asgard, but instead the Maker helped Loki kill Odin and steal his birthright, ruining Thor's future. And not just Thor, but many others like him, like the rest of them, which now for Thor just confirms even further that the pain that he's nursed for years wasn't a sickness or a flaw, but instead a righteous anger. So when Tony asks if he'll help, Thor says yes, he's with them. But when Tony asks the same question to Sif, she's more or less like she'll stick around for the ride and just see where this goes. So from here, Reed shows them the layout for a number of different repositories located at the Maker's castle that contains items, each of them that will work as a catalyst for a number of the heroes who have been unmade. And we'll get a closer look at what some of these items may be, at least one of them. And he goes on to show them that they're located in the capital of Latveria, which Thor mentions is going to be heavily guarded. So Tony tells them if only we had some way to get there magically and in the blink of an eye. And the next thing we see is them inside the castle, walking away from the Bifrost burn mark. Like ain't nobody gonna see that. But when they make their way to the entrance, it's here where they discover that the pathway is shielded. So initially Reed is like no problem, because he should have enough information on the Maker to figure it out and get them inside. But as it turns out, the Maker made sure that no active passcodes will be available when the city is closed, which is really smart on the Maker's part, because who else would he want inside of here aside from himself? But the problem is, now that the Maker's trapped in the city, there seems to be no way in. And so Thor's just like, step aside, so that he can create them a not so quiet entrance. So at this point, Tony's just pretty much like, why not? So Thor calls for the thunder and he gets them in. But to their surprise, there's no alarm, no guards, which for a moment has Tony thinking that the information might be incorrect and perhaps there's nothing of value here. but Reed assures him that they are in the right place, and each of these repositories are holding 100 items that have been taken to alter the lives of would-be superheroes. And it's like now with seeing all these containers, it puts it into perspective for Thor. Because if you take all those and multiply by 100, it's like, man, look what this world could have been. But now with seeing how large they are and how many there are, this creates the new issue of how they're going to get them all out of here. Because Tony makes a good point. He tells them that it's not like they can just pick which ones they want to take or make multiple trips. So he suggests that they just group them all together and have Thor take them all in one go. But Sif just points out that even with Mjolnir, Thor has his limits as far as the size of the area that he can move. So Thor just gives this whole speech about how this world has been robbed and how this is the work of demons and devils. And he tells them that he can do it because he's a god. And he's not bound by the limits of men. And so next, a sword goes through Thor's back, which of course nobody was expecting, and this was done by Earth 6160 Captain Britain, member of the Maker's Illuminati, who, just as a reminder, this guy's OP for a Captain Britain, cause like we were told, this guy has a sword of might and the amulet of right. He didn't choose one or the other, he took both. So they're pretty much dealing with Captain Double Down here, and he's just running through these guys. With a sneak attack on Thor, he smacks Sif across the room, he dunks Reed's face into the ground, but when he gets to Tony, things take a bit of a turn, cause Tony tells him, I know who you are, and what you secret rulers of the world have done. It's going to end. And Captain Britain asks him, who's gonna end it? You? As he slices Tony's helmet, revealing his face. And Captain Britain's like, I know that face. As Tony tells him, I want you to remember it. As he puts his hand on top of Captain Britain's eye and just point blank repulsor blasts that man. And when he goes back to check on Thor, he asks him, can you get us out of here? And the wounded Thor tells him yes, which now takes them all back to Stark Tower. And as soon as they get there, Tony, he's activating the emergency protocols, which he's a little nervous about doing since he's never done it before. And even now, Sif expresses her concern by saying that Thor is her prisoner so he can't die on her watch, but you can tell that she's actually more convinced about the truth now, after everything that's happened. And from here, we just see this automation pick up Thor and begin to go to work on giving Thor what I imagine is going to be this universe's Tony Stark version of what the Thor on Earth 1610 got, which was a biomechanical suit that initially reminded Thor, who started out as a regular guy, who thought he was human for years. But this biomech suit brought back his memories from eons ago in his life as Thor, which at first had people thinking that he was crazy, but after a number of MRI scans, it was proven that these memories were true. And over time, this mech suit, which was really just the breastplate, your belt, and eventually a hammer, they would go on to see a number of revisions from Dr. Brian Braddock, from Tony Stark, and it just evolved over time, with it having features like flight, limited invulnerability, a teleportation engine. And I just imagine that whatever we're getting with the new Ultimates Thor, I'm sure it's going to carry over some similarities, though I can't quite put my finger on it just yet. Because in this case, with the automations being designed by Howard Stark and Tony stepping in to kind of tweak and modify for Thor, we could see some temporal additions or even crazy amplifications to the powers that Thor already has. It's hard to say. We'll just have to wait and see. But also we find out that they were able to take some of these relics that were stolen from heroes, since they were only able to get away with one repository, which happens to have a radioactive spider in it. But back over in Latveria, we find Captain Britain doing a Skype call with the rest of the members of the Illuminati, and this man's hurt. Man, he's like, man, look what he did to my face. Because after that fight with Tony, he's left with only one eye. He's telling them it was Stark, but of course they're like, what do you mean? Because Howard Stark was inside the city when it closed. So he tells them, no, not the father, it was his son. So the Hulk just tells the captain that he's sorry about the loss of his eye, but recently they've been wondering on how to deal with the empty seat of power that has been vacant since the loss of Obadiah Stane and recently Howard Stark. But going forward, they now have their plan, because what they're gonna do is spin this around on Tony and make it seem like what he did to Captain Britain was a terrorist attack, which then allows them to retaliate as part of their plan of taking the North American territory. And to do this, they end up using one of the Stark-Stane satellites to beam down on Stark Tower, which they have access to because at one point Obadiah Stane was a member of the Illuminati. But when this incoming attack sets off the alarms for Tony and Reed, Tony activates his Immortus engine since Thor's not in the condition to get them out of there. And with how this is done, it is cut so close that you can tell how it would be hard for anyone to believe that anyone in this general area had made it out alive. And when Captain Britain asks the Illuminati how are they going to sell it as far as the narrative and the lies, the Hulk tells them we do what we do. We tell lies so large that it's inconceivable that they are fabricated or false. And we cover that with just enough truth to sell it. We put his name on it, Stark, which again just goes back to what we saw in Ultimate Invasion. because these guys have been manipulating the world for years, and the only difference now is that the maker's out of the picture, so now they're pretty much running things the way that they want. And just after this, we jump forward 1 week later, as we're shown an aerial view for Ground Zero of what used to be Stark Tower. That takes us to a news broadcast reflecting on the events of the past week, and as this is going, the anchor mentions that there are thousands that still remain missing, with almost no physical evidence remaining. But with using GPS and digital IDs, as well as other forensic data, there's been a database collected to make a list of names for people who may have been in the blast radius of the attack. And amongst the names we see going across the screen on the broadcast, there are names like May Parker, Emily Osborn, Norman Osborn, which are definitely going to play a significant role when we see the other Ultimates issues roll out. But also in this news broadcast, we're shown how a number of these events weren't just limited to the US. And for a moment it flashes through the different footage that they have, with a car explosively colliding with a bicycle in the streets, and in other areas you got blackouts and rumors of open insurgents. Which again, this isn't only the Illuminati creating these different instances and lying about them, but there's also bits of truth sprinkled in here, which has me curious to who or what we might have seen called out of hiding in some of the blurred images provided. But as far as the Illuminati, with it being their plan to pin the attack and the chaos on Tony Stark, part of the reasoning of why they're banking on people believing it is because his family built the tech. And through this news report, we're seeing that it's working, because the last thing we hear this reporter say before he goes off air is, why would this teenage boy commit this terrible act? Some have suggested that it was because of his father and godfather's recent passing. Others have assumed that it was simple madness. We will continue to try to find the answers to these questions. But as Tony Stark is believed to have been in the blast, it is safe to assume that he too has perished. And it's very possible we may never know why he did it. So yeah, Tony Stark is public enemy number 1 going forward. And I can't wait to hear what you guys think about all of this in the comments. And so now real quick, I want to give a special shout out to all the patrons. Thank you guys for all of your support. And for anyone who's new here, who wants more information on how to support the channel, I got a link below where you can go to patreon.com/DopeSpill. But that'll do it for this one, guys. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below, and we'll do it again on the next one. Alright, later.